I've been a Windows guy my whole life. I've grown up playing San Andreas and Battlefield on my mum's computer, which ran Windows 7 at the time, and it just bled into me building my computer, installing Windows on it and calling it a day. However, I've always been interested in trying new things, even when support and adoption may be, in some cases, scarce. That interest peaked when I decided to rip a drive out of my server and install Arch Linux on it. At the time, I wasn't prepared to give up my Windows install on my primary SSD because I was skeptical about things working, compatibility with hardware, etc. However, since forcing myself to use it as a daily driver operating system for about 2 months now, I'm in love with it, and will have a hard time swapping back to Windows on all my personal computers. Installing Arch was actually pretty easy for me, but then again, I'm pretty familiar with Linux, using CLI-based inputs, and reading guides online. First time around, installing this, however, had me jumping back and forth between the live USB just because I forgot to install DHCPCD so I could actually get an IP address and use the NIC on my motherboard. Once I did get to a stage where I could start customizing my install, it was easy sailing. Reading the wiki is a common occurrence if you want to get standard things working, like a desktop manager for instance, but once they're working, you shouldn't need to reread the page unless you really want to know more about what you're actually doing. I thought it was going to be hard to find replacement software to replace my Windows experience. However, on the Arch Linux AUR repository, there are many third-party packages you can download, some of which are just direct replacements of Windows applications. For example, Google Chrome is just straight up available, same for Spotify, and even Discord is available. Who knows, maybe the program you're looking for is just available via Pacman, like Steam is. If you want to find out, you can have a look at archlinux.org/packages, links in the description, or if you can, run pacman -S lowercase s xyz being a package that you want to search, in a terminal emulator, and it will search all the repositories that it has access to. For example, I was struggling to find OBS Studio in the AUR repository, so I had a quick glance at the base repository and boom, there it was. I'm going to preface this part with my system specs, as your mileage may vary depending on the hardware you have. I have an Intel Core i5 9600K at 5GHz, and AMD RX 5700 XT and 32GB of RAM. It's socketed in an MSI Mag Z370M mortar with my root and home folder installed on a 120GB SSD. My games are all installed on an NTFS disk using NTFS-3G to mount them. I didn't expect games to run all crash hot, however, if you weren't aware, Steam have been working on a compatibility layer called Proton that is baked into the native Steam client. Just choose the game you want to boot, select the Proton version, latest is usually the best, unless it breaks the game you're trying to play. You can check protondb.com for more information about a specific game. Again, links in the description. If you want to try more than just the Steam whitelisted games, you'll need to go to Steam, Settings, Steam Play, enable Steam Play for all other titles, then select the default Proton version you want to use. Disclaimer: this basic guide is for Arch and any Arch-based OSs, so Manjaro, etc. This isn't guaranteed to work on all other distributions of Linux. Just go and read your individual wikis, guys. Also, I'm not responsible for screwing up your install. Make sure you're familiar with what you're doing before you go doing it. If you have games installed on an NTFS disk, you will need to download NTFS-3G. That's found in Pacman, so Pacman-S NTFS-3G. After this has been downloaded, run ID. This will give you your group ID and user ID to correctly mount the NTFS disks. Now open your fstab file, found at /etc/fstab, with your favorite text editor. I personally use Nano, however you can use whatever you want. If your disks don't show up for whatever reason, make sure they're mounted where you want them mounted, and run sudo gen fstab -U 2 greater than signs /etc/fstab. Once this has been done, reopen the file and change the partition type from NTFS to NTFS-3G on the relevant disks. And also add UID equals XXXX, GID-XXX, substituting the values with your respective user and group ID to the end of the flanks of the relevant disks. This will cause the disks to be mounted properly with the correct ownership assigned to you. Proton has this issue where even when you have full rewrite access to the disks, it will actually still error out and say, oh, operation not permitted, even though you own the disks. So this is just mounting it correctly, so Proton actually knows that you own the disks. This won't change any file permissions in Windows, so don't worry about that. This is just Linux mounting stuff. Lutris is a great third-party launcher for independent games, not on Steam. This can also be used for Steam games, however, I found that Steam handles it pretty good already, so choose what you want to do. Lutris handles the wine configuration for games and programs, and will tailor the installation on a per-game basis. I've had Overwatch running at 1080p at over 100 FPS on Linux using Lutris. It's pretty damn impressive. I also played Trackmania United Forever through Lutris because the Steam version broke engine noises and made the gameplay very ominous and eerie. Lutris even supports game emulation, so I can put my ISO library of legit ripped games to good use. Disclaimer, I actually own all these games and am entitled to have a legal ripped copy on my computer, so please don't sue me, because I will not be sued. Performance does take a bit of a hit due to drivers not being like 1,000,000% optimized, and having that emulation overhead for games that require DirectX does also take a bit of a hit. However, with some tweaking, this can be minimized or mitigated altogether. I think Linux has become a viable gaming platform even if game developers don't actively support it, thanks to emulation applications like Wine. If you say that Proton is different from Wine, I'd just like to let you know that you're actually wrong. This is cited from Proton's GitHub page, which are exclusive to Windows to run on the Linux operating system. It uses Wine to facilitate this. If you want to see this grow into its maximum potential, then go and give Linux a go. The only way that companies are going to develop for Linux is if more people use it, and Linux becomes a more requested feature of games. They're not developing for it because it's such a niche marketplace. There's no point focusing on one operating system if there's only going to be around 1,500 to 2,000 people using it, when there's going to be over 1,000,000 people playing it on Windows. Linux isn't all that scary either, and there's no harm in exploring what version of Linux you want to use. I chose Arch because I wanted a challenge configuring it, and I got a very customizable and tailor-made operating system out of it. If you're completely new to Linux and want to get your feet wet, try Ubuntu. It is the most used Linux distribution out there, with beginner how-to guides focusing on it. If you want more of a challenge, try using something like Manjaro, which is based on Arch. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you use, as you can make one distribution look identical to another by installing another desktop environment. I personally run KDE Plasma if anybody was wondering. Well, that's it. I hope you found this informative and useful, and I hope this has kickstarted you in your Linux adventures. Good luck, and take care.